about the dick. I got diamonds at Leontes. Bathing ape like I'm a Robbie. Shake your head at the real nigga. Riding rich, I get figures. Ben Roethlisberger Stiller. Don't change like a caterpillar.
Alrighty, welcome to the Around the 412 Fantasy Football Show. I am your host, Smitty. Do not have Donnie with me here this week, as you can see. Although, they do look a lot alike, I do agree. But anyway, I'm going to give you guys my notes. I do have Donnie's notes here, so I will read them off and let you know what his advice will be for what is most people's fantasy football championship, hopefully. I mean, if you play past Week 16, I feel very sorry for you because a lot of people will probably be sitting in Week 17 when things get locked up. For example, Lamar Jackson could very well be sitting in Week 17, and that's obviously your QB1 top fantasy football player overall this season. So, the Around the 412 Fantasy Football Show is part of the Pod Hub Network. You can go to podhubnetwork.com and check them out. Check out all the other shows along with us on the network. Check out the social media page at Pod Hub Network. Also, Around the 412 is sponsored by Keats Barbershop. Keats Barbershop is an old-fashioned barbershop located at 180 Brighton Avenue in Rochester, PA. He is open 10 to 7 Tuesday through Friday and 9 to 4 on Saturday. Every Tuesday he does $5 off for military personnel, first responders, and nurses. And right now, actually this is the last day, so you had Keats Christmas Drive going on to give you guys a little bit of background on what he was doing. You take a donation, whether it be a toy, monetary, clothes, card, whatever, and you get $5 off your next hair service. But actually today is the last day of that, so this doesn't really help you out much. But anyway, Keats Barbershop located at 180 Brighton Avenue in Rochester, PA, open 10 to 7 Tuesday through Friday, Saturday 9 to 4, $5 off if you're military personnel, first responder, or nurse. Without further ado, we can kind of just jump right into the show. As we always do, we got top 5 by position, but we're also going to give you 2 bold predictions each that we have, that we think are either going to make or break your fantasy football championship. Okay, so I'll start off with my top 5 quarterbacks. Number 1, I got Lamar Jackson, and what hopefully, if you're a Steeler fan like myself, is his last game of the regular season. He goes against Cleveland here. He's pretty much matchup proof with what he brings with his legs as well as with his arm. And from a fantasy football standpoint, you can argue whatever you want as far as, his real life football, his ability to throw the football. But you know what? He's answered a lot of questions this year, I think, with his arm, along with his legs, and he's keeping defenses honest, and what they have going in Baltimore is just very special right now. Will it last? I can't answer that. Only time will tell. They'll answer those questions on their own. But for what is going on right now, it's very special. And as a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, you got to hate to see it. So Lamar Jackson going against Cleveland is my quarterback number 1. My quarterback number 2 is going to be Deshaun Watson going against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That is a Saturday matchup. There are Saturday games. There were no Thursday night games. Last week included Thursday night football, but there's 3 games on the Saturday slate. So, if you got a lot of guys playing in those games like myself, make sure you get those lineups set because that could throw some people off. Deshaun Watson against Tampa Bay here is a mouthwatering matchup for him and DeAndre Hopkins. Spoiler alert, DeAndre Hopkins is obviously in my top 5. He's going to be every week regardless of the matchup. But, right here, this is mouthwatering stuff. In what looks like a shootout, it's a shame that Tampa Bay won't have Chris Godwin or Mike Evans. I would have probably Jameis Winston in my top 5 if that were the case, if he had, even one of those guys. But we know Jameis is a gunslinger. He should still be able to do, some things against that Houston defense, which isn't very good, to keep this a shootout. So Deshaun Watson, is going to have to put points up, I think, in this one. And I think that he will do so. And, Deshaun Watson, very special player, potential MVP candidate. Lamar Jackson kind of ran away with that thing at this point, but we'll see who the final 3 are at least. My quarterback number 3, Pat Mahomes, and this is, a tough matchup with Chicago. They're a top 5 defense against the pass, but it's Pat Mahomes that I mentioned in the last show. Kansas City's offense really getting everything rolling this week. And I just, I'm sorry, not this week, multiple weeks, they've started to get things really rolling there. The defense is playing better for them as well. But, Pat Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, just that offense in general, really getting things going. And Pat Mahomes is a top 5 quarterback every single week, regardless of the matchup. And right here, he rounds out my top 3. Russ Wilson going against Arizona, this is the best possible matchup for a quarterback. Most weeks I probably would put Russ Wilson higher. He's been kind of another, guy that we had in the MVP race and very well still could be. Maybe he, jumps back into that with these next couple weeks. But he's got the best possible matchup for a quarterback here. Arizona gives up the most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Russell Wilson, we'll see what he gets from his receivers. Tyler Lockett's been pretty up and down. He's gotten some good rapport with DK Metcalf going now. But I'm really looking at what Russell Wilson brings with his legs too here. I think he'll add somewhere between 40 to 50 yards on the ground as well. So that obviously gives you a higher floor. At the minimum, but raises the ceiling as well. And rounding out my top 5, and another middle of the pack matchup here for Drew Brees going against the Titans. But with what Drew Brees has been doing recently, 11 touchdowns to 0 picks over the last couple weeks. New Orleans offense, as I mentioned, Kansas City's offense. New Orleans offense is really starting to put it all together. Got one of the best weapons in football, if not the best weapon, in Michael Thomas. Him and Jared Cook have really gotten on the same page recently. Traquan Smith, that running game, which we haven't seen a ton of success for Alvin Kamara in that offense, kind of the forgotten man. Only 2 touchdowns this year compared to 18 last year, but still, Drew Brees is one of the better quarterbacks in the league. He's in a great offense with a great person at the helm of that offense in Sean Payton. And I'm a big believer in New Orleans offense. I like Drew Brees here, even with the matchup not being that great. As far as Donnie goes, he's got a lot of the same names, actually 4 of the same names, not necessarily the same order. But he goes Lamar Jackson against Cleveland, Russell Wilson against Arizona, Deshaun Watson against Tampa Bay, Pat Mahomes at Chicago, and then he goes Matt Ryan against Jacksonville to round out his top 5. So no Drew Brees for him. I don't have a problem with the Matt Ryan against Jacksonville. Matt Ryan's coming off a pretty solid game. The Jacksonville defense is obviously not what it used to be just a couple years ago. A lot of the same faces aren't there anymore. Excuse me. And Matt Ryan, and Julio Jones, once again, getting back to what Drew Brees has with Michael Thomas. It's a special connection. And from a fantasy football perspective, we're not talking real life here. Matt Ryan, what he's going to give you. He's going to give you 20 or so points every single week. So, like Matt Ryan here against Jacksonville, I had him just outside. That was another name that I considered, but I just think with what Drew Brees has done over the last couple of weeks, that gives him a little bit of an edge for me. Jump into running backs now. We'll start with mine. We both have the same, number 1 anyway. It's going to be Christian McCaffrey going against the Indianapolis Colts. Christian McCaffrey's running back 1 every single week. He's at the highest floor of anybody in fantasy football. When you have a running back that's catching 10-plus balls out of the backfield, he's a monster. He's a monster. He's the most valuable player in fantasy football. I get that what Lamar Jackson's doing, and I mentioned, he's winning a lot of leagues and everything like that. You'd say the same thing for Christian McCaffrey, but Christian McCaffrey does it at a position where, he's far and away the best at his position, whereas there's guys that are relatively close to Lamar Jackson in terms of fantasy points. Christian McCaffrey is just an absolute animal. He's that entire offense. He's an MVP candidate from the running back position. So Christian McCaffrey does it all for that offense, and going against the Colts here, middle of the pack matchup. It's not the greatest, but it's Christian McCaffrey. So running back number 2 for me is to be Saquon Barkley against Washington. A lot of the reasons that I said about Christian McCaffrey could be said about Saquon Barkley coming into the season, what they thought he would be for that offense. Obviously, he's been hindered by injury a little bit and just a really bad offense. They've, went from Eli Manning to Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones got hurt, went back to Eli because of that, and now Daniel Jones is returning from injury this week. So, we'll see what happens there. Saquon, was very good last year with Eli Manning under center, even though Eli wasn't very good. It helped out Saquon. With Daniel Jones, that hasn't necessarily been the case. So if you're a Saquon owner, you might have been wanting Eli to stay under center. But, I'm not, maybe there's no correlation there. Saquon Barkley going against Washington here is a very good matchup, and he's, pretty much that entire offense. Give your guy the rock. He's there for a reason. You took him 2nd overall for a reason. As soon as he stepped on the football field, he was considered one of the top 5 backs. So just give him the rock and let him work. Chris Carson going against Arizona. Kind of the same reason I mentioned, Russ Wilson against Arizona. The matchup is just phenomenal. Arizona's defense is one of the worst in the league. They give up a ton of points, whether it be through the air or on the ground. Chris Carson quietly been one of the better running backs in football this year. He hasn't been in my top 5 a whole lot, but that's just, that's not doing due diligence on my part, because Chris Carson, who had some fumbling issues at the beginning of the season, has been rock solid for that team. A team that in past years has, they've been kind of struggling to find a true number 1 running back since Marshawn Lynch. And, Chris Carson's kind of filled that void finally for them. And, Rashad Penny was mixing in nice and everything like that. But, Chris Carson's really the workhorse back for them. And a phenomenal matchup with Arizona, and I like him here to round up my top 3. I had a little bit of trouble, picking between 3 and 4 because I'm very high on this guy, and I'll get to another note that I have on him a little later. But Joe Mixon goes against the Dolphins this week, and I think that this is a guy that wins a lot of championships for people this week. You took him probably as a fringe number 1 running back in your draft, and you really didn't reap the benefits of that until these last couple weeks. But this is a phenomenal matchup with what Joe Mixon did to New England and Baltimore. Just over the last couple of weeks against better defenses, you got to expect that he's going to be able to get you 15 plus this week against the Miami team that gives up the 6th most points to the running back position. I am a Joe Mixon owner, and maybe this is just me being super optimistic about his outlook this week. Because, it's against the Dolphins and it's the championship and you're looking for, 1 or 2 guys to really just raise their level of play over what they normally do. And I think Joe Mixon's one of the guys to look for to do that this week with that phenomenal matchup. And obviously, the Cincinnati offense has to go through him. A.J. Green's been pretty much shut down. Tyler Boyd's, been okay. I think it's not necessarily a fact of Tyler Boyd not pulling his own weight. I think it's, more so the quarterback play that's hindering him. But really, Joe Mixon's the guy on that offense. Excuse me. In rounding out my top 5 is going to be Ezekiel Elliott against Philadelphia, coming off a phenomenal week against the Rams. Zeke gets a divisional matchup here, really for the division, in my opinion. Both teams come into this 7-7. Whoever wins this game is going to win the NFC East. Ezekiel Elliott, like I said, coming off a great game. This is, Philadelphia is kind of middle of the pack against running backs, but I looked at this as, and Dak with a little bit of an injury as well. I looked at this as just a matchup where Ezekiel Elliott needs to be the guy for the Dallas Cowboys to win the division. This was tough because Ezekiel Elliott, we talked about him on the last show. It's like he still was, even going into last week, considered the number 6 running back overall in fantasy. But as Ezekiel Elliott owners, you just didn't really feel that way. You're worried about Tony Pollard maybe taking some work. What if the Cowboys jump out to a huge lead again like they did against the Rams? How could that affect his workload? But with the Dak injury and, with this being a divisional game, I think that they're going to ride the guy that they paid. And I think Ezekiel Elliott has another really strong week and finishes right at number 5 for me in terms of my rankings. Taking a look at Donnie's. So he's got, like I said, Christian McCaffrey. He is also high on Joe Mixon this week. And actually, we have the same top 5. This is great. A little bit of a different order. So he goes Christian McCaffrey against Indianapolis, Joe Mixon against Miami, Chris Carson against Arizona, Saquon Barkley at Washington, and Ezekiel Elliott at Philadelphia. The one name in there, or 2 names in there, Joe Mixon and Chris Carson, which you might not typically see in the top 5. Those are they're bulletproof matchups in my opinion. And those guys are both, coming off really good runs that they've had. Joe Mixon, like I mentioned, you draft him as a fringe running back 1, you really weren't getting that production. Now is the time where he's going to make you the money that you were hoping to make when you drafted him. So, okay, wide receivers. I'll actually start with Donnie's. Wide receiver 1, kind of the same thing with Christian McCaffrey at the running back position. We have a guy like that, and Michael Thomas at the receiver position, who's got the highest floor of anybody. What he does every single week, he could break the record this year for most receptions in a season. He does against Tennessee. I'm curious to see who matches up with him there. Is it going to be Logan Ryan? It'll be Dory Jackson. Whatever they decide to do, Michael Thomas is probably going to win that battle overall. But so that's pretty much wide receiver 1 every single week. It has been, since the first couple weeks of the season. You could argue that the number 2 receiver on both of our lists, DeAndre Hopkins, was in that mix to start the season. He came in as this is the guy that we think is the best receiver in the league. Look at what he did without great quarterback play. Now he's got Deshaun Watson. So DeAndre Hopkins here against Tampa Bay, as I mentioned, on a Saturday night. I love the matchup. Obviously, him and Deshaun Watson have a great thing going, and Tampa Bay's a very poor secondary. I'm not sure, once again, who's going to match up with him for the most part, but it really doesn't matter. They could put anybody on there. He's probably going to see double coverage. He goes Julio Jones against Jacksonville. Here's wide receiver 3. He's got Matt Ryan as his quarterback 5, so this makes a ton of sense. I do also have Julio Jones in my top 5. But, going against Jacksonville, probably see a lot of A.J. Boye, but Julio Jones is still going to get his against him. Jacksonville, like I mentioned, it's just not the same defense that we saw in 2017. They took a step back last year, and they've taken another step back really this year. Obviously, they traded Jalen Ramsey. Telvin Smith never reported to the team. He's taken time away. And then Miles Jack was put on IR. So it's pretty much been a lost season in Jacksonville, and what a shame, because 2017, everything looked to be on the up and up, and they finally felt like they got a quarterback in Nick Foles, so they decided to pay in free agency, and things just haven't worked out that way. Devontae Adams going against Minnesota here, Monday Night Football. A huge divisional matchup. Devontae Adams going against Minnesota. Minnesota gives up the 8th most points to that position. He could very well see a lot of Rhodes. I almost said Howard. Xavier Rhodes, but he's going to be crossing the roads in my opinion. Xavier Rhodes has gone from one of the better corners in the league to probably one of the more overrated if you still view him that way. He just has not been very good the last couple seasons, quite frankly. But he's still the guy that they're going to put on top receivers, which in this case is Devontae Adams. I think Devontae Adams is in for a huge day against them. So, and Donnie goes Tyler Lockett here versus Arizona. The best matchup for quarterbacks. So Russell Wilson obviously is he has him as a top 2 play. And Tyler Lockett rounding out his top 5 makes a ton of sense for that reason. Will we see a lot of Patrick Peterson? I'm not sure. But I do think that Tyler Lockett's a very good play. He's just been so up and down, and injuries have played into that a lot. But he's a talented dude. We've seen that he has one of the more ridiculous touchdown receptions on the year this year. And I have no problem with him rounding out Donnie's top 5 at that position. Looking at mine, I have Michael Thomas, Hopkins, Adams, Jones, and then the only difference is instead of Lockett, I have Tyreek Hill. Not a great matchup here with the Bears, but as I mentioned, last week and pretty much every week, as far as Tyreek Hill goes, it only takes one play for him to really make a fantasy day. So, he can score a 40-yard touchdown, 50-yard touchdown, whatever it might be, and, right there, he's got close to enough points to be considered a top 5 play just in that one play. So, Tyreek Hill brings that big play ability. If he doesn't get that one play, he might not even be in like the top 15. That is the risk that you run with Tyreek Hill, is he's not necessarily the volume pass catcher. He relies on, the big play or two to make or break his day. So, but I think, against Chicago here, not a great matchup. However, I still, I'm banking on him really making just one play to save his fantasy day. Tight ends, George Kittle's pretty much always going to be my tight end 1. I think he's the best tight end in the league. I think he's past Travis Kelce in that perspective. I got Zach Ertz going against Dallas here, which is a very good matchup for tight ends. It's a top 10 matchup. And really what him and Wentz have been able to do the last couple weeks, following, a lot of weeks of disappointment for fantasy owners, has been very good. And, similar to Joe Mixon, like now is the time that you want him to be at his best to make you that money. Hopefully you're able to survive long enough through the season to get you to this point with him. But now he's really, making his mark on your fantasy team and hopefully winning you a championship this week. Travis Kelce going in Chicago. I mean, it's Travis Kelce. It's not a great matchup, but he's always going to be in the top 3. Those top 3 guys between Kittle, Ertz, Kelce, those are, a lot of people consider them interchangeable within the top 3. Those are the big 3 tight ends, and as far as like past that, then you always, you see a drop off. So my 4 and 5 are going to be Darren Waller going against the Chargers and Mark Andrews against Cleveland. And, Darren Waller, obviously, he's the top pass catching option for a Raiders team that's lost Hunter Renfrow. Tyrell Williams has been pretty good, but obviously they expect to have Antonio Brown at the beginning of the season, and that never happened. They didn't play a single game with him. So Darren Waller's been a big beneficiary. Always been a talented dude, just couldn't get out of his own way. And Mark Andrews is having a phenomenal season. I personally think that Darren Waller got snubbed from the Pro Bowl, but maybe this is now a game where he shoves it to the NFL and the votees for not having him on that Pro Bowl roster. And he goes against the Chargers, which is kind of a middle-of-the-pack matchup, but I still love him in that spot. I think, you can pretty much mark him down for 10-plus targets. So at tight end, Donnie goes Zach Ertz against Dallas, George Kittle against the Rams, Darren Waller against the Chargers, Travis Kelce against the Bears, and then Tyler Higbee at San Fran, and that's kind of interesting to me. What Tyler Higbee's done the last few weeks within, sans Gerald Everett has been phenomenal. He has been a tight end 1 since that, and, at a position where you're not getting a whole lot for Tyler Higbee, who I think he caught like 10 passes against the Cowboys on Sundays, something close to that, but has been targeted a ton in the absence of Gerald Everett. I have absolutely no problem with that pick. We had the same 5 again. The only difference is I went with Mark Andrews and he went with Higbee, which I have no issue with. He goes against San Fran here, which isn't a great matchup. But, the volume of targets he's been getting definitely warrants him being considered a top 5 play. Okay, so looking at waiver wire ads now, if you're really in a pinch for a certain position this week, trying to win a championship, you don't love your guy's matchup or something like that, I'm actually in a position where I don't love my quarterback's matchup, and I'm debating on picking up, a guy to start just from a championship, which is obviously a very bold decision. But, I'd be looking at For me personally, Ryan Fitzpatrick here, he goes against Cincinnati, which is a great matchup. He's owned in just 30% of Yahoo leagues. Ryan Fitzpatrick and Devontae Parker, they've been one of the better combinations under the radar the last quarter of the season. So if you're really desperate for a quarterback, I don't think you can go wrong with Ryan Fitzpatrick going against one of the worst defenses in football. Donnie at the quarterback position is going to go with Ryan Fitzpatrick as well. He's only owned in 15% of ESPN leagues, and he notes on here he's averaging 23 fantasy points per game. Obviously facing a Meb Bengals pass defense with no strong rushing attack, and the newfound Devontae Parker, who just got rewarded with a 4-year extension in Miami as well. So, all things definitely of note there. But yeah, if you're really desperate for a quarterback play, I think Ryan Fitzpatrick's probably the way you want to go. Running back, we'll start with Donnie, who goes Mike Boone here. Nearly zero ownership in ESPN leagues. They played Green Bay this week, and he scored 17 points in the absence of Cook and Madison, and both very well look to be out. We know that Dalvin Cook is going to be held out, very well could be held out week 17 as well. Boone is a steal. They're going against the 24th ranked rush defense against in the Packers, and Mike Boone is on my roster right now. I'm waiting and seeing what the status is of Madison, but that very well could be my running back in the league this week trying to win a championship. So another guy that's going to be playing due to injury, DeAndre Washington, is my guy. They go against the Chargers this week. He's owned in 38% of Yahoo leagues, and he scored 18 points in the game a couple weeks ago that Jacobs missed. So I expect that Jalen Richard will probably mix in a little bit, but DeAndre Washington's going to be the workhorse back and take a lot of the touches away that Jacobs would have if he were there. So wide receiver, I go with Anthony Miller facing Kansas City here. Owned in 42% of Yahoo leagues. The last 3 weeks he scored 22 points, 11 points, and 18 points. Going against Kansas City, which isn't a great matchup, but with what he's all of a sudden, Mitch Trubisky can play quarterback again. It's crazy. He's starting to do things with his legs and open up the offense. Going back to 2018. It's kind of too little too late as far as the season goes for the Bears overall. But for guys like Anthony Miller and Allen Robinson, it's a very good thing. And if you're obviously a Bears fan and you're looking for signs of life from Trubisky, you've gotten it the past few weeks. So I like Anthony Miller here doing this. Kansas City owning just 42% of Yahoo leagues. If you're looking for a flex play or something like that, and you're in a pretty deep league, I think that's a good bet. Donnie goes with James Washington here, who's been on a hot streak, owning just 30% of ESPN leagues. They play the Jets, who are the 23rd ranked pass defense, in a game where it might be closer than some think. The Jets have played pretty tough at home. They're going to be 500 or so when it finishes up, when it's all said and done at home. And Sam Darnold, has been pretty hot and cold since coming back from that mono. So if he has a really good day, which we have seen, he could keep the Jets in it. Whereas if he has a very bad day, this thing could be over before halftime. So Donnie tends to think it's going to be a little closer than some think. He's averaging nearly 15 fantasy points over the last 4 weeks. Hodges is going to be looking for a bounce back game here against the Jets after a 4-interception performance against the Bills, and on the road against the Jets. He's hopefully he's able to shake off that performance. Doesn't seem to have a confidence issue. So we'll see if he's able to answer the bell, and if he does, James Washington could be a big beneficiary there. A little bit of an injury note, it looks like Juju Smith-Schuster could be back in that offense, so that could open things up for James Washington as well, along with Vance McDonald being able to clear concussion protocol and, really just get all the weapons back and see, how things shake out, how defenses want to cover when you have your full complement of pass catchers. Tight end, excuse me. Donnie goes with Jonnu Smith here, who we both mentioned last week, owning just 7% of ESPN leagues. They're doing it to the Saints here. I mean, if you're looking for a tight end on waivers, you're likely looking for a tight end that might give you double-digit points at best. Smith has delivered that in the last 2 weeks, so we play a game that would likely have ample opportunity for Tannehill to throw the ball, for better or worse. You won't find much better than that on the waivers at this point in the season, and I completely agree. We know Derrick Henry's got a little bit of a hamstring issue that he looks like he's got tough out, but I think if Tennessee's going to win this game, they're going to have to win it through the air because the Saints could be keying on that hamstring injury. And, props to Derrick Henry for trying to gut that out, but he's a running back and it's a hamstring, so I don't think he's going to be near himself in that game, and Brian Tannehill and that pass-catching offense is going to have to find a way to get it done. Now, will they? I'll talk about that here very shortly. But my waiver wire tight end here is going to be O.J. Howard, and, Ryan are dying with this. He hasn't done nearly anything this season. He's only just 44% of Yahoo leagues after being picked as one of the top like 6 tight ends at the draft. But they have no Chris Godwin. They have no Mike Evans this week. They're doing against Houston, which is a very bad defense. I just think that, between him and Cam Bright, there's going to be ample opportunity at that position. Rashad Perriman's obviously going to be the number 1 receiver this week, coming off a 3-touchdown performance as well. But, you're looking at other guys, and Jameis Winston even said in practice, I'm getting you guys the ball this week to Howard and Cam Bright. So, O.J. Howard's my guy this week. I'm going solely based off the talent that I know is there. He just has not shown it this year to this point. But, hopefully we see something that we haven't seen yet from O.J. Howard. And, throwing a dart here, he could end up winning you a championship. So our fantasy bold predictions, I'll start with mine. I already mentioned just a second ago, talking about, Ryan Tannehill and that Titans offense going against the Saints. And so one of my bold predictions is Ryan Tannehill is going to lose your fantasy championship this week if you start him at quarterback. People have been Ryan Tannehill, to their championship here down the stretch. Since he became the starter, he's been phenomenal. He has been a quarterback 1. He's warranted that. I've started him. But, going against the Saints here, Derrick Henry being out with a hamstring injury, they're going to be able to key in on that passing attack. I just think that they're able to shut it down. I think the Saints have a very good pass rush. I think Cam Jordan gets to him a couple times. I don't think that we see the Ryan Tannehill that we have seen these last couple weeks show up in the championship. I think he scores less than 15 points, and that very well could be the difference between you taking home first and second place. If you're throwing him out there, I think that there's going to be better options available, and it's kind of hard because, the Saints they give up the 12th most points to quarterbacks, so it's kind of, on the better side of average for you if you're starting Tannehill. But I don't know. I like Ryan Tannehill and everything. I just don't think that this is the matchup. If Derrick Henry were healthy and able to open things up, maybe I would feel comfortable with it. I don't see good fortune here. Personal prediction, it's a bold prediction. That's why it's bold. But I think that if you start Ryan Tannehill, depending on what obviously the team does against you, I think that you're putting yourself behind the 8 ball by doing it. In my bold prediction, another one, I'm going to say Joe Mixon here is going to have a league-winning performance. What I mean by that is, he's going to be one of those 1 or 2 guys that you look for to really elevate their game that much more in the championship. His season's been more down than up, but these last couple of weeks he's been very good against better defenses than he's playing this week in the Dolphins. He's been an absolute monster. I think he's a top 5 play this week going against the Dolphins. And he was drafted as a fringe running back 1. This is where you finally get rewarded for selecting Joe Mixon. It's time to take home that gold. So Joe Mixon gives you a championship performance this week as a top 5 play. I'm going to say, he very well could be a top 3 play. I have him as my 4, so right in the middle there of 3 and 5. I'm a believer in Joe Mixon. I think he's a phenomenal running back. I just think that the Bengals have failed him this year with that offense, and how different could it be next year with Joe Burrow? We'll see. But as far as Donnie's go, Jameis Winston will fall apart. Sorry to those that have dumped their fantasy football dreams in the arm of Winston. I might be biased due to previous experience with him, but Winston is the definition of inconsistent, and I'd rather sit him on my bench and be burned than start him and have a championship taken. I have been pretty high on Winston from a fantasy football perspective, not a real life perspective. Somebody told me at the casino last week, and it was the perfect explanation, that he keeps both teams in the game, and that's very true. He's going to throw 3 touchdowns. He's probably going to throw 3 picks. But from a fantasy football perspective, he's still going to give you 30-plus points. This is tough because he doesn't have his top 2 weapons. Is he going to be able to delegate that to Rashad Perriman and those tight ends I just talked about? I tend to agree with Donnie here. I don't have him in my top 5, which if I had even one of those guys being Godwin or Evans, I probably would have him in my top 5. I think he's more of, a quarterback 10 maybe this week, and that's, in a mouthwatering matchup with the Texans. So I would not be starting Jameis Winston if I had a, relatively comparable starting option. And his other is he's not too confident in Kenyon Drake. Kenyon Drake's coming off a 4-touchdown performance. He's willing to say he isn't able to hit 12-plus points after scoring 38 in PPR leagues last week. Before last week, Drake's last performances were as followed: 9, 13, 7, 9, and is last week an outlier? He certainly tends to believe so. It's a dice roll every single week in terms of the touches in that backfield, with Chase Edmonds and David Johnson being there. So you look at Kenyon Drake, is he really going to be, the touch monster that he was last week again this week, and Donnie certainly does not tend to think so. I think Kenyon Drake does, take the RB1 touches there. I think he will still be, the workload is definitely going to be there for him to pop off again. I just don't think he does it. I think relatively high Kenyon Drake. I think that he's a starting running back in this league, whether it be with Arizona, if he sticks around there or whatever. But, I don't see him, I don't have him in my top 5. I think he might be somewhere near the back end of the top 10 this week. But, yeah, he's not a top 5 play for me. I don't think, obviously 38 points is definitely an outlier in my opinion. I, might give him somewhere between 15 to 18 if you're in a PPR league. But, yeah, he's not going to score 38 again. I hope nobody's really relying on that. I think that he warrants being in the lineup still as an RB2 or a flex somewhere. But, yeah, if he's my RB1, I'm not feeling that confident in it going into championship game here. But, hey, he's largely the reason you're in the championship, right? So, he's got to be in your lineup. So, but, yeah, I'm with Donnie in terms of him thinking that he's not going to, pop off the way that he did last week by any means. So, once again, this has, been Around the 412 Fantasy Football Show. I'm Smitty. Donnie's not here. This kind of wraps up the season. We might do a wrap-up show. Not totally sure. Donnie and I have been talking about transitioning the show to sort of like a draft-type show. So you can let us know if that's something that you'd be interested in. We're both going to be in Mobile, Alabama for the Senior Bowl. So we're going to be able to, we're probably going to do a podcast or something from there. Hopefully get a couple interviews and see what's up with the seniors and, be able to provide some good coverage and content for you guys from there. But I'm super excited about it. I don't know how many people know about it, but if you're listening to this, you know now. So Donnie and I are going to continue to do stuff together. Don't worry. But this pretty much wraps up the fantasy season. I wish everybody the best of luck in the championship, assuming they're playing in it. It's been a fun season. There's been a lot of things going on in Donnie and our lives that have prevented us from doing, both being here every single week. But we've made the best of the situation, I think. And we're gonna be back next year. So thanks everybody that's listened to this show, and we appreciate it immensely. You can follow me at Z23Smitty. You can follow Donnie at Donnie Druin. Follow Around the 412. Follow PodHub Network. Go to podhubnetwork.com and check out our show and all the other shows on there. We're sponsored by Teach Barbershop, that's located at 180 Brighton Avenue in Rochester, PA. Open 10 to 7 Tuesday through Friday and 9 to 4 on Saturday. He does $5 off every single Tuesday for first responders, military personnel, and nurses. That's Teach Barbershop, 180 Brighton Avenue in Rochester, PA. Thanks again, guys, for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.